in the Open Genealogy Lab, we are pleased to continue with our outstanding guest speaker series. Our guest speaker today is Marston Watson. Marston, a native of Cambridge, Massachusetts, is a professional speaker, genealogist, and author of 4 volumes of Royal Families, Americans of Royal and Noble Ancestry. His recent publication is a 9-generation silver book, volume 25, of Governor Edward Winslow of the Mayflower and his second wife, Susanna Jackson, widow of Mayflower passenger William White. Marston's genealogical articles are published in the New England Historical and Genealogical Register, the Mayflower Descendant, Mayflower Quarterly, and other publications. In today's presentation, he's going to discuss what common ancestors do Elizabeth II, Elizabeth of England, Princess Diana, and our speaker have in common. He will answer your questions and the burning questions you might have regarding your own connection to royal and noble ancestry. Millions of Americans can claim their heritage to royal and noble ancestors. Regrettably, there is no peerage waiting for you in Great Britain or in other European countries, but there's only the satisfaction in knowing that you have bragging rights to this ancestry. So without further ado, I would like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Marston.
Oh boy, who wrote that anyway?
I wonder.
I just have to, Suzanne and all of you in the class, I'm so honored to be here. I listened to all of the distinguished people that you're coming in the future, and I said, how did I get here? So I'm just happy to do so, and particularly honored to be at your opening of the library. It's not been very easy. Same in California. Our genealogical library has been closed. Our Mayflower library has been closed. So it's not been a lot of fun, especially for me as a genealogist. So I'm glad to be here and thank you. Now I'm in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. So the very first question I'm going to ask all of you, what famous person was born and lived here and painted here? I gave you one clue already. Anybody know? Not even you, Suzanne?
No, I'm sorry. I'm playing with some settings here. I apologize. Go ahead.
So anyway, does anyone know who lived here and who was most famous, particularly in the 40s and 50s and 60s? Oh. And he was on magazine covers every Saturday.
Norman Rockwell.
Thank you. That's exactly. Here are some of the memorable. Some of you, I'm just going to pass through this from the museum that's located here. I plan to go. I've been there before, and I plan to go again. But these, I mean, these are classic pictures that some of you, I'm sure, will remember. So that's where I'm coming from. All right, we'll send him a ride here. Before I get into this, let me understand that all of you have at least have some basics. So I may repeat some of those basics, and it's only because I want the continuity of the presentation. One of the first things that will be important to all of you is saying, what's the burning question? Well, how do I find out if I am descended from royalty? And as Suzanne read in the introduction, you know, it's wonderful to know that you are. Millions and millions of Americans are. But we don't get any peerage out of that. In other words, nobody's going to honor us. Nobody's going to give us, you know, knight us or anything of that nature. And I'm going to tell you, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a proud American, so I don't need those titles because that's what we rejected originally when we came to this country. Many of those gateway ancestors came from very distinguished families, obviously royalty, nobility, and as such, they, you know, rejected all that. They gave all of those titles up because this country does not recognize titles for Americans in particular. So that's the reason that we won't be getting Prince William's job anytime soon. The first thing that may be important to all of you is what is a gateway ancestor? It simply is somebody who came to this country principally in the 1630s, 40s, with the Great Migration period. And the Great Migration, I think you're familiar with. I think that you have the books of Robert Anderson on that very topic. And as such, you will know that that was a very important part of the history of the immigration of many of these gateway ancestors. Now, why would people give up their royalty? Why would they give up the beautiful home they had and all the money and the land and everything like that? Well, I'm not going to give you a whole history lesson because that would take too long, but obviously that there were conflicts with the changeover, particularly from Queen Elizabeth, who was Church of England, and King James, who followed, was Catholic. And that was that religion seems to be an important part of all of this immigration. I don't like your religion, so I'm going to be this one. And if I don't like it in England, I'm going to come to America, which essentially the Pilgrims did, didn't they? They came here for religious freedom. Well, I think we could say even in the 21st century that religion is certainly a topic of either joy or concern as to the rights of people in general. So when the Pilgrims came, they said, okay, we're here for religious freedom. By 1636 in Salem, the Puritans said, well, if you're not my religion, you have to go. And Roger Williams, who eventually founded Rhode Island, was one of the ones kicked out of Salem, along with Anne Hutchinson. And some of you, I'm sure, may remember who Anne Hutchinson is. It happens to be one of the books that I wrote and had published. And she was kicked out of Salem because those two and others did not agree with the strict Puritan requirements of living in the town of Salem. So the general, I suppose, making a general statement about who was here from royalty would be those who either got on the wrong side of the king, wrong side of religion, perhaps, and who said, I want a better life. Now, one of the things that's interesting about coming to this country, I might just as a genealogical sort of short remark, and that is the fact that land, of course, was here, wasn't it? I mean, they didn't need to spend thousands of pounds of English money to buy land so much. They did have to use money to do it. They can't just grab it, but a lot of it was granted. And it could be 40 acres, it could be 160 acres. And that ultimately made many of the early immigrants to this country very rich. My ancestor, George Watson of Plymouth, so that's my direct line, came in he was born in 1602 and ended up in Maine for a short time in 1631 and then in Plymouth in 1635. I wish I knew more about his background because he became very wealthy. He owned the iron works in Taunton, Massachusetts. He, a part owner, I should say, and he owned a lot of land. So it was an opportunity for a new life for many of these people, even though they didn't know for sure just what it was going to be like, especially our early Mayflower Pilgrims. Now, you need to know, where do we start? Okay, you have to start with yourself. See, I can't give you the royalty down. You have to go up to royalty. And I think you understand that as experienced genealogist that you are. So you start with yourself, start with your parents, and you go continue on to your grandparents and so forth. Now, some people, unfortunately, they go very narrow. They just sort of say, well, I'm a Watson, so I'll just look at Watson. But as you well know, every generation multiplies the opportunities you have for different lines that may go back to the Mayflower, may go back to Jamestown, may go back to royalty. All of those can happen as a result of the multiple generations that you have to research and record. Well, let me start off with one thing that I particularly find, if I don't care what your beginning is, I don't know how far along you are. In my opinion, until you put it into some kind of a database, and it could be legacy, it could be I'm going to use an old one that you can't get anymore, so you don't need to look for it. But the fact of the matter is that what I use is called the master genealogy. Okay, and so I started out with, and this is the fourth book that I did. I'm sort of reviewing a lot of the people who were in that book. But if I started out with my name, you're going to find out that I will have multiple opportunities to see who all my different lines are. So this case, I didn't go down all the way to me, but my second great grandfather is about as far as I went down. But it was because the book was 9 generations. I would be the 11th, 12th generation, 13th generation. Okay. But if I look at this, my great grandfather, or second great grandfather, and I were to look at his line, okay, oops, sorry, that was not the line I wanted you to see. If I were to look at the tree, this would be a fairly, it ends back in to Isaac Winslow, okay, and Isaac Winslow is the one that I'm interested in because it goes back all the way to Thomas West Delaware, and that is of nobility. Now, if I go to the other chart, which is this one here, all right, but these are two very important areas. I had showed you, and I didn't go through the other yet, but I will in a minute. Dame Catherine Carey, let's start with a story. I think it's always important. How did I get to Maryboleyn? And why is that important to me and to the Queen of England and to Prince Charles and to Princess Diana? And the reason is that Maryboleyn had a 5-year dalliance, shall we say, try to be polite with this, a 5-year dalliance with King Henry VIII. In other words, he kept her at court, a married woman, by the way. She was married to William Carey, this man right here. But William Carey, they did not have children prior to her going to court. She was in court for 5 years, during which time she bore 2 children. Now, why do we think that there's a strong possibility that Henry's the father? Well, first of all, he didn't allow husband to share the bed of Maryboleyn while he was doing that, okay? So that's certainly a very strong circumstantial evidence. The other circumstantial evidence is the fact that he could not declare that these were his children. And why was that? Because he had to preserve the descendancy of the crown to Elizabeth, who was of legitimate birth. He had no males. The ones he did have, 1 or 2, died. And what's ironic is that Maryboleyn had a son and a daughter. And I suppose if the illegitimate son could have been given the crown, then he would have had a male descent. But he didn't. He had Queen Elizabeth, and she never married. So Maryboleyn's 2 children, and there's another part of the story. Elizabeth was obviously related to Mary's children, either as cousins or as half-brother and sister, depending on how you want to look at it. But what you can know for sure, if you've ever been to Westminster Abbey, is the fact that as you look at the altar, on the very left side is a huge monument, 12, 15, 20 feet high. of Lord Hunsdon. That's the male birth of Maryboleyn. Okay, otherwise known as Carey, but he was also known as Lord Hunsdon. And as a result, Queen Elizabeth paid for that. She also paid for a much smaller brass plate on the other side of the altar for Catherine Carey. So she acknowledged the connection to these two children. But again, unless there was either DNA, which will never happen, or some other documents that acknowledge those births, Henry VIII remains a mystery, but not one that's completely impossible to believe is the father of those two children. Now, when I was earlier, and again, let me just make sure that I do this correctly. I went back here. Now, am I back to the other screen or not?
No, you're still on Master Genealogist.
All right, so again, I go to new share, right?
New share.
And then I go to this. Now I'm back, right?
Yes, now we see page 896.
Okay. The reason for page 896, which I'd like to get larger, but I can move this out of the way. Here we go. All right. I have to move me around. Okay. Here is Catherine Carey again. You all see that?
Yes.
That's the daughter of Maryboleyn. Here's Maryboleyn. And the way I wrote the book and the way that that Gary Boyd Roberts had suggested, rather than probably, I used the word possibly fathered Mary to Carey children during their affair. Now, what I didn't mention, and I think you possibly know about this, that Maryboleyn had a sister, a younger sister, Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn eventually married Henry VIII and gave birth to Elizabeth. That's legitimate. But she also paid a price. If anyone remembers what happened to her, off with her head. So when he died, when rather he married, started taking up with Anne, Maryboleyn returned to her home, and her husband died rather young. He died within just a few years later, and she married another man and had no more children. So Maryboleyn is the sister, as it says on the top there, the wife of Henry VIII and the mother of Elizabeth. Now, this is where I have three Careys across, the same person. But I wanted to show you how, in my particular case, it's not only exciting to know that I'm descended from royal and noble descendants, ancestry, but that I'm also related to some rather important people. Not the least of which, of course, is the fact that I'm related to Queen Elizabeth II. In other words, her line is different from mine, except that we all three, the three lines that I'm looking at, come from Catherine Carey and her husband, Sir Francis Knowles. And that's Knowles. It looks like Knowles, but it's the English way of spelling Knowles. I come through Anne, sister, Queen Elizabeth, and the other person, the other person being Diana, Princess Diana. They come from Lettice Knowles. Okay, but then they begin to diverge after a while. But you can see the similarities on the fifth generation. My ancestor is here in America. So it didn't take Penelope West and Herbert Pelham came to New England. They came to Massachusetts. Then I worked down, and that's where we separate until we get down to the my name here. Okay, Elizabeth is here, and she comes, of course, from King George VI. You all, I'm sure, know who he is. And you've heard of Edward John Spencer. He was alive when Princess Diana married Prince Charles. So my children are 13th cousins. It says 16, but you have to remember, you still have to account for the person, Karen, their parents and grandparents, and then that's when you have the difference of 3 years, 3 generations, sorry. So Karen is the 13th generation. All of this gets back to who are your gateway ancestors, and I have a way of showing that to you through, let me see if I have that here. Here we go. Now I have to share this again, right?
Yes, correct.
All right, new share. And
You can just share your entire screen. It'll just switch whatever window you have up.
that's what I thought, but
Yeah. I think it's on the far left for screen
all right,
when you bring up the panel.
okay. Am I in the new screen?
We're seeing a list of names with green
Okay.
writing.
All right. This list I would like to share with all of you. In other words, this is called Gateway Ancestors List. So I'm not going to ask you questions at this point in time but here's the interesting part. All of these people came to the United States or to the colonies. It really wasn't the United States at the time. They came to the colonies. Now, as I go through slowly, and I'm only going to do it just somewhat slowly because obviously I don't know any of you or what your background might be, but if you seem to see a name that you'd like to look up sometime, that could be your ancestor who came to this country, to the colonies, in the early 1600s. So as a result, you then that would be considered gateway ancestor. Kind of a funny expression, but that's who it would be. And if I go through this list, I have more than one. I'm very fortunate. The Bulkley is Grace Bulkley. This is my wife, for example, would be that's her royal ancestry. And as we go through butlers, you probably have seen butler names and so forth. So I'm going down slowly, and Suzanne, I'm sure you can find this. Let me see if I can get you the. It's really not a well, there. It's under WikiTree. It's called Gateway Ancestors Magna Carta Project. What I recommend is you go through that just to see if you can even recognize a name. But keep in mind where. All right, and I know this is not working right again. And somebody spoke up and told me what I should have done.
We see master genealogist right now.
Oh, good. Okay. You mean I actually did it right this time? All right. So let me go through and right here, I'm going to go back to, everybody knows who Maryboleyn is. Now, the way I keep track is I have a different color for my direct line. So Mary had 2 children. Here's Henry Carey, who became Lord Hunsdon rather. And here's Dame Catherine Carey. Keep in mind, it looks like they're the children of William Carey, but all I'm saying is we might have another reason for not believing that. So then I go through her. Then I come down through Anne Knowles. So all of this is important for the very reason, and I'm going to get down to me because, or at least I think I am, pretty sure I am, yep. Through the Isaac Winslow. Winslow was the ancestor, the grandson of Governor Edward Winslow, one of the prominent pilgrims who came over on the Mayflower. And then you have Elizabeth Winslow, married Benjamin Marston. You want to know how I got my name? You're now looking at it, okay? And then Patience Marston married Watson, and there's where my 5th great-grandfather is. And then from there, my 4th great-grandfather, sorry. And then we come to Colonel Marston Watson. That's where my name came from. And then my 2nd great-grandfather, my grandfather, grandfather, great grandfather rather, and my grandfather, and he was an only child. And this is my father, and this is Marston Watson, and who married Louise Malou. And this is my current family of 2 children, and Eric Winslow Watson and Karen. So you can see that what I did, you have to build up. I took you down, but you all know this. You're all been through Suzanne's class, that you have to start with yourself. You can't do it the other way around. People have tried. I remember sitting opposite a woman at the library in Salt Lake City, and she says, "Oh, I'm descended from so and so up here, the Mayflower passenger, and I'm descended from these in the bottom. I can't connect them," she said. "They're about 2 generations." Well, she still had to work on the one that goes up. She couldn't work on the way down because she wasn't sure. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer, but this is important to get your data on some. And do you teach that, Suzanne?
Yes, but what question I have right now, and I'll open it up to the class. Did you have like oral family history that was like handed down to you that kind of gave you an indicator that you might be related to royalty, or did you discover it completely by accident?
No. Okay, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that. My great grandfather in the late 1800s had a very interesting history of our family. Far brief, much more brief than certainly what I've done since then. And off to the side, off to the one of the charts, just was the name Thomas Dudley. And I had no clue. I mean, it didn't mean a thing to me until around 1991. I saw a book by Frederick Weiss on royal descents. And there he was. And it took me all the way back through. Since then, I became more experienced, and Gary Boyd Roberts published some books that were helpful. Richardson, Douglas Richardson published. Then there were some other sources I know that you have recommended to them. All of those references began to make some sense. Now, my father took that handwritten genealogy, and he spent the entire year of 1939 on a Royal manual typewriter, typing all of the names, the dates, and so forth. Now, my father he wasn't an engineer, but he had gone to MIT for 1 semester before he married. And so he had this kind of engineering mentality, if you will. And so what he did is he did cutout slots, rectangular cutout slots. So you could go from Marston to Joseph to my grandfather Charles, and you could turn the page and there they would be. And the next one had more cutouts. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's the old-fashioned pedigree chart that my father created from the manual typewriter. I thought it was pretty remarkable. So I had, from the age of 3, I had at least that. I mean, I didn't, of course, obviously he wasn't teaching that to me at that time. When I was in high school, of course, by the time I was in high school, it's later, when there was Xerox machine. I mean, he showed us the book by the time we were in high school. And then later, when Xerox came out in the mid-60s, I believe, we made copies, and I've had a copy of that ever since. So I had that basis to start this chart that you're looking at right now, to put my name in, my parents' name, and so forth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, did you find that there were any errors? Because of course, the standards in years gone by, of course, the standards have become a little bit more, strict nowadays. The book that you inherited, did it have sources?
No, of course not. And if I may borrow a phrase that's familiar to all of us, trust, but verify. And we know who that came from, President Reagan. So the one thing, and that's a very good point, Suzanne, and I want to make clear that you may find things on, for example, you may find things that are on, public member trees. Okay, am I doing it right now finally?
Yes, we see public member trees.
Okay, and I know I don't need to do this because you teach. You have this ancestry.com in your classroom. Is that correct?
No,
Suzanne?
we don't have ancestry.com. We have family search, but many of the libraries around us do have ancestry.com.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then let me throw in, and may I use this for a couple of minutes or so?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. This is ancestry.com, and as it's a subscription, and it's one that can be very powerful, but it can also have a lot of errors. So the trust but verify simply means that whatever is in here, whether it's let's just say Jemima Waldegrave. I just happen to know that's part of my royal family. Okay, so I do this and I put in Waldegrave. This happens to be the very person. Okay, let me move something over here. I don't know if my picture's in the way, but it's in the way for me. So there's one site that has it. Here's another person that has it. But the chances are, and you see this date of 1606 is correct, but it doesn't have the full date. And you can find that either in Richardson's book, Douglas Richardson, or you can find it other sources, royal sources that you can use. The same thing with marriage. This marriage is definitely a vital record of Cambridge, Massachusetts. But what I would do is put those names in. Just go ahead and do it anyway. And then what you do is you go back and you say, I've got to verify this information. I can't just simply copy what I see in front of me. So now I have to go, and I won't do it, because it would take a couple of minutes, and I don't at this point. But you all know how to do vital records, I assume, Suzanne, is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And New England being the best of all, in my opinion. It's been done almost from the 1630s in Boston and elsewhere. So, and if you ever wonder, and I think you may know the answer to this, Suzanne, but you probably know how those books came about. And back in the early 20th century, grants were issued. They must have had money back then, to cities to pay people to copy all of the original records and put them in a book. So those 10 books that you have for Massachusetts all came, for the most part, from grant money. If you look at the dates of those books, you're looking at the first 10 to 20 years of the 20th century. So now, for example, this Atlantis Ocean, New Jersey, I happen to know that's wrong. I don't know where that comes from. So don't believe that. And you say, well, but, and look, someone says she was in Baltimore, Maryland. Same person. So I'm showing you some good data, but I'm also sharing you some awful data. Do you see what the difference is, all of you?
Yes.
And this not Redgrave, Suffolk, and I do know the town, but it escapes me at the moment. So sometimes what I do is I'll say, okay, well, that's Jamaica. Sorry, that's the wrong one. So as you go through this list, there's so many that are, look, incomplete. So although I like Ancestry.com, I only like it to help you think that if this is the correct person, where can I get better information? That's the important question. Now, in this country, we go to, and I think, did you say you have?
Marston, before you go on to American Ancestors, we had another question. Stephen, did you have a question?
Yes. Is lineage the reason that New England started recording verse earlier than most places?
Yes, yeah. In some states that particularly in the West, Not so much California, but New Mexico, I think, didn't even start until about the early 20th century. So when you get to the Midwest and some other places, going back to the 1700s is not going to be easy at all. You then, and I'll get to another story in just a minute. So is that the question you're asking?
Is it about lineage? And
About what now? Sorry.
is it about the lineage, royal lineage that ingrained in their society, the people's, I want to be, my lineage is important.
Yes.
Did it?
Are you talking about lineage societies like the Sons of the American Revolution or Daughters of the American Revolution?
No, they're
Or-
lineage to royal.
Or all right, the Charlemagne Society? Or the baronial, the baronial barons? Is
Well-
that the societies that you, if you could, you would like to belong to then? Is that the question?
No, was it important to the people who immigrated, like the Mayflower and their?
Yes. Oh, was the lineage
They were
important to them?
related to back in England, was that important?
No,
That's why they
not
had
necessarily.
vital records.
Although I can't say for sure, but not necessarily. They really wanted, that's a good question because they really wanted to divorce themselves from that, didn't they? In fact, some of them came to this country. If anybody remembers who King Charles I was, he was beheaded, wasn't he? And so what we call regicide, a regicide judge is one who makes a judgment against the king or against royalty for the most part, but it's usually the king. So King Charles had jurors who decided to have his head cut off. 3 of them, at least, came to this country and lived with one of my ancestors. That's a fascinating story. And they lived all their life in the cellar, basically, or and they couldn't go out. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't tell people who they were until the day they died. And 100 years after the death of all these people, they found the bones of these regicide judges. So yeah, no, a lot of people came to this country to hide from that. They didn't necessarily change their name. They just simply came here to get away from that. So the lineage wasn't as important. I'm sure they knew it. I'm not saying that they didn't know it, but it wasn't important. That's, I think,
What made them record the birth so regularly?
Well, I think Marston, what he's trying to get at is obviously vital records became important to the original comers to our country. So
yes,
what was the reasoning? Was it to trace their royal ancestry, or was it just to make sure that
No.
property inheritance was correct?
right. That the answer is the second part of what you said. It had nothing to do with their ancestry. The recording was very important for claims, and as I'm sure the ladies of your room of your students there know that the primogenitor was the one who got the land, the male. Okay, so yes, the recording of births, whether or not they were by marriage or illegitimate, those were important records that were kept at that time. So it was done for the purpose of owning land primarily. See, to become a freeman was you were granted the freemanship, if you will, in order to be able to have property. And so that also was recorded. Hundreds, thousands of men became freemen. Again, it wasn't women, it was the men. And so the record was important for where they lived, not where they came from. That answers your question.
Yes.
Good. Sometimes I couldn't hear all of it. I apologize. If I detour, I'll ask Suzanne to repeat it. Your sound is good. It may be just me. Now let's see. Oh, so then The other one that, do you have this in your classroom?
No, we don't
Suzanne?
have it in, we don't have American Ancestors as a subscription, but I do, on my Saturday assistance appointments, I use it.
Yeah, this one is extremely, they have done things that are amazing. This comes from the New England, as you can see, the New England Historic Genealogical Society. It's in Boston. In fact, about a mile and a half from, about a mile from where I stay in Boston. I'm now in a different place, but I was 2 nights there and I'll be back there again. And it's just about a mile away. And it has been doing a remarkable job of digitizing original records. And if you can get the original record, you're golden. Then your genealogy is golden. Your application for membership to many, many societies. I'm not saying this to impress you, but because of the rich history that I have, I can belong to about 50 to 60 lineage societies. I choose not to because I'm not wealthy, number one, and I don't necessarily need to, number two. And my age has something to do with that as well. Nevertheless, when you're young, you can't afford it. When you're older, you don't care. So anyway, you were mentioning Jay, a friend of mine, and he belongs to a number of lineage societies, and so do I, but some of the important ones. And by the way, speaking of that, I do want to, and I know we're on the subject of royalty, but lineage societies are very exciting sometimes. For example, the Society of Cincinnati, Jay and I both belong from a different state of origin for the ancestor. And it allows you to room at a 40,000 square foot mansion in downtown Washington, D.C. That's not a bad thing. And the price is right, as they say. So, and also, and in a few minutes, I'm going to share a couple of stories about the American Revolution as well. But let's get back to American Ancestry. This is not necessarily a royal site, by the way. What it is it's your very old important American site. So that if you know who your grandparents are, it's important to be able, so let's just demonstrate, let's say I was starting out, as some of you might be. If I wanted to look up, I said, well, I do know who my grandfather was. Excuse me. My grandfather was Charles Morris. Oh, come on. I'm trying to do 3 things at the same time. Morris Watson. Now, let's say I don't even know his birth, but I do know at least, well, the years is what it says here. So I happen to know that he was born in 18, oops. I happen to know he was born around 1868, so I'm going to put 1865 to 1870. I'm going to put birth. Now, I'm not sure where he was born. I'm sure, but you may not be sure where he was born, if it was your ancestor. So let's see what I get as a result. I have different Charles. Why I don't have that is because there are too many of them, apparently. So that's, okay, here we go. I think I just saw it. That's Scotland. Let's go back. Oh, you know what? I forgot to mark. See that exact search up there? I didn't mark that. If I hadn't, and that's why I got that whole long list. So if you don't know the spelling, you would go over here to Soundex and you would eliminate exact search. I don't know if my ancestor was B-O-R-N-E, B-O-U-R-N-E, if I'm looking at born. There may be several spellings. So in my case, I do know that we're Watson. So I'm going to, oops, get out of here. There we go. Let me see if he's been put in here, and it should be, I would think.
Did you want exact search?
I do have exact
Okay,
search.
yeah, you need to go back and do exact search.
Oh, I thought I did. Am I jumping around? Oops, you're right. I didn't do that. Okay. Let's see if he pops up. Apparently he doesn't come up. So somebody hasn't done anything, and I happen to know why. And this one is a good example of something that could happen to you. You may, why wouldn't I have that? I mean, that should be easy. Well, his father was a Marine in the 1800s. And guess where my ancestor was born? On the Marine base in New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They have their own records. So obviously, the American Ancestors does not have a record of my ancestor's birth. There are other ways of getting it, but that one was not the right one. So I did choose something that's difficult. And that's what you're going to run into once in a while. But he was born in the military base, which is a different set of records. So now we go back and let me put in his father. And I know where his father was born, so I should have a better reading of that. Again, I'm leaving off the city, the state. I don't like doing that because in my case, I happen to know most of my ancestors were Massachusetts. But that's all right. Let's see if he can get them without.
Do you need to change the years?
Oh yeah, I would think so. It's been a while on this one. All right. So 1830, let's say to 1860. It can't be 1860. All right, 1830 to 1840. If you can, try to keep it within a 10-year period. It makes it a lot easier. There he is. Okay. So I hit it right. He was actually born in 1840. There's that. Now let's go ahead and review that one. Good. There's the vital record. So I'm golden because he is. I need to get a picture out of this so I can go through this. Okay, so we go down to Watson, and Arthur Lee Watson is obviously down the bottom here. And there he was. And you see, and here's an interesting, he was a lieutenant with the US Marine Corps. So again, that's the reason I couldn't get my grandfather's birth. But I have Arthur Lee Watson, and there's his birth. This is in the Cambridge Births, which is a published record. You can also get the original of this. And that you get through ancestry.com. So the two of them can work hand in hand, okay? So if a lineage society, which does accept these books, by the way, so you normally don't have to go back to the original. Can you imagine what it would be like to go back to the original? As I did in my early genealogy, I'd have to go to the library. I used to carry around on the plane 4 3-inch binders of paper in order to do my genealogy. 4 3-inch binders. That was a lot of in a suitcase, roller. So ancestry.com, as well as, and if you're in New England, and keep in mind this is principally New England, as you can imagine, then I would use both of those sites. That make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Just to kind of catch up, here are the 4 books that I did. I'm not going to read any of those, but those all come from the genealogical.com. And those are the books that you have in the library, so I don't need to go over them. But I just wanted to show that site does give a rather nice biography, as well as more importantly, what's in these books. Okay.
Marston, before you leave on the subject of your books, because we do have all of them in our research room.
All right.
Can you kind of just give us a very brief overview of how to use the books?
Okay. That's a good question, because even my own family says, well, how do I know how to find, where do I go? Well, if you go to the book itself and you start out, let's go back, well, that one page, to answer your question, this was page 896. You have, and I'm sure I can get all the other pages, but here is the, if I were to go through the index, you would start out with the person who you do know is in your family. Otherwise, the book is not going to be too helpful. But here is the book, or rather, sorry, the index to the book. All right. So let's answer your question. And I have to move me out of the way. And let me go to, I know exactly, I'm going to go to Watson. And since I already know how to, who it is, I should say, and I'll get there quickly, but I don't, unfortunately, I don't want to skip it. So there we go. We're almost there. Okay. So you remember, I may have mentioned that John Lee Watson. So John Lee Watson was my second great grandfather. He's found on page 333. His father was Arthur Lee Watson. I'm sorry, his father was Marston Watson. Sorry, I went way back. His father was Marston Watson, Colonel Marston Watson. He's also on page 3033. So you now know that's the father's son. But then you also have to find out who his parents were. And you go to page 97. So you work your way through that. But once you go to those pages, and I could do that, then there is a way to use those books. And let's see if we can't do that for you. You'll have to be patient. I get to 330. Good. I think I did it. All right. So 333 is right here. Well, he's on 331, actually. There we go. So Marston Watson is number 403. So the next thing you would do is you would go through this book, and I'm not going to go, but I can find it. And he would be shown as a child of Patience Marston. You see that next to it?
Yes, uh-huh.
Then you have Elizabeth Winslow. Then you have Isaac, Penelope Pelham, Herbert, Penelope West, and Thomas West, who's the Lord Delaware, which in this case, this is the royal ancestor I happen to know. So I have more than one way to show that, because this book is about Lord Delaware's descendants from Maryboleyn. So this is who I am. This is my ancestors right here. Now you can go back, and so then I happen to know that what I did, it was as an author, I could do what I wanted to. So I decided that I would bold in the name of my next ancestor, so it was easy to find. So I told my children, if you wanted to find out, just look at the bold, okay? So they don't get confused with who are all these other people. Well, all these other people are your cousins, essentially. So the other way you could use these books is go through the indexes of all four of them. See if you recognize any names. But again, you have to know something about your own family in order to do that. You have to be able to say, well, I at least know who my grandparents are, or my great-grandparents. And if some of you, and I don't know what the age of your audience is, but if some of you are young enough to still have grandparents, for heaven's sakes, go to them and say, who were your parents and grandparents? And that would be 5, 6 generations for you. And that's huge, especially if they're from this country. Now, again, we're not talking about across the seas at this point in time. I mean, I'm lucky to have my father's line is one line. My mother's is from the Lebanese line. Well, you and I know that's Arabic, right? And so my grandparents came over, not on the Mayflower, but on some kind of ship from Syria. And as a result, my genealogy, although I know who my great grandmother is, but aside from that, through the census records, by the way, aside from that, I don't speak Arabic. I don't read Arabic, and you know how, what the characters look like. So some of those researches are going to be different, difficult, I should say.
Marston, I can't imagine. I mean, all four of your volumes are pretty thick, very, very intensive information.
Yeah, I
How
know.
long did it take you to write those 4 volumes?
Oh gosh, the first one took I think most of them took about 2 years. This one here, probably 3 years. It's 9 generations. It's the longest book I've ever produced for in genealogy, and that, as well as my Edward Winslow. And the reason I did 9 generations of Edward Winslow, which is interesting, the very first book that was done about his descendants was 28 pages. My book is 450 pages, 479.
Yeah, I was looking at your volume 25 in the silver books,
Yes.
just this morning, and it is one of the thicker silver books we have.
It is, because I was allowed to do 9 generations. And I was very thankful for that, because nobody has ever done Winslow in Canada that I'm aware of. And you will notice there's a big Canadian section. And why is it Canadian? Because the ancestor involved was a Tory in the American Revolution. And as a result, his property was taken away from him. In fact, if any of you know anything about Plymouth and the Mayflower, and I won't ask you to raise your hand because I can't see you right now, but if you have ever been to Plymouth and seen the Mayflower, you know there's a museum there, a house, what they call the Mayflower House. Well, that was once owned by Edward Winslow, not the immigrant, but the great grandson, and he was a Tory. And they took over that house, and he lost all his property, went to Canada, and became wealthy again because of land that was available to. Land is everything in those days, especially. I mean, we all like to own homes, but in that case, they owned huge acreage property. So that house was taken away and eventually was purchased by the Mayflower Society. So that's how that came about. Any other questions?
Do you have just one Mayflower ancestor, or do you have
No,
more?
I have more. I have obviously so Edward and his wife. I have John Howland and his wife Tilly. So that means I also have her parents. So I have Tilly, Howard. I'm sorry. I have Winslow and Howland and Tilly. So out of the 102 passengers on the Mayflower, I have 6 of them.
Wow.
There's some people who have a dozen, 2 dozen other passengers. Amazing.
Do any of those pilgrims have their roots with royalty?
Besides Edward Winslow, no. He probably was one of the most prominent, not necessarily in the historical sense, but in the lineage, through his son rather, who married Pelham. And once he married Pelham, he married into royalty. And I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't other descendants who couldn't have been married into the royalty eventually, maybe several generations later. But none of them on the Mayflower, they were pretty ordinary people. They were religious people, but they were ordinary people for the most part. Edward apparently had some wealth. In fact, he's the only, he and his son and his son's wife are the only portraits of any of the Mayflower passengers. Because they went back to England, which means they had money to get those portraits done. And so he's the only Mayflower passenger. His son's was not a passenger, but he was, and he's the only passenger out of 102 who ever had a portrait done.
Well, that's really interesting. Stephen, did you have another question? You had your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay. Now, Marston, you said you were going to talk a little bit about the DAR. We have several DAR representatives here.
Oh, okay. I'd love to. Yes, and SAR as well. The Sons of the American Revolution, believe it or not, was started in San Francisco, California. Amazing. You would think it would start back east, but it was called Sons of Revolutionary Sires. And they were very patriotic, and they decided on July 4th, 1876, on the 100th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, they decided to form a society called the Sons of Revolutionary Sires. And they met on Kearny Street in San Francisco. And the organization existed until 1889, when it became part of, by that time, they had expanded a little bit into Nevada. Nevada was the second place, believe it or not, that the society moved to, or had members. And then eventually back east in New Jersey, I believe it is where they formed another society, a similar chapter or state society, I should say. And on 1889 is when it was formed into the Sons of the American Revolution. And then 3 years later, in 1892, were the Daughters of the American Revolution. Now, the Revolutionary War, despite the fact that this topic is about royalty, the Revolutionary War, in my opinion, is one of the truly wonderful stories of our country. And I have 18 ancestors that I have personally qualified through the Sons of the American Revolution, which is probably the maximum. And considering the fact that it's only on one side of my family through my father, other people, many of you may be in the classroom, have both sides of your family who come from the Revolutionary War, and you could have double that many, 36. Some people have 40, 50 ancestors of the American Revolution. And there are people, thank goodness, that are not you, but there's so many people who roll their eyes when you talk to them about your ancestry. Well, let me tell you a story that I think may fascinate you. You all know about Paul Revere. I don't believe there's anybody in that room that doesn't know who Paul Revere was. Now, he did his own autobiography, and he was a fascinating. He was a silversmith. He obviously, he was successful in his business, but he was a Sons of Liberty member, and he was very interested in separating from the English harsh rule. He also made friends with Samuel Adams, not the Samuel Adams who became president, who was, by the way, a first cousin to another Samuel Adams of Boston. And by the way, just for fun, I had a nice, wonderful Samuel Adams beer at lunch. So anyway, and if any of you know or ever seen the Samuel Adams beer, you'll notice a picture on there. Whose picture do you think it is?
It's not
You
him.
would say Samuel Adams, right?
Yeah.
Not true. Apparently he wasn't as good looking as Paul Revere, so the company decided to put Paul Revere's picture on there. So strange thing. So in any case, Paul Revere was a personal friend of my third great granduncle, John Pulling. John Pulling was the Sons of Liberty as well. And I don't know, do you keep any magazines, Suzanne, from the societies at all?
We get the DAR magazine.
Not the SAR.
No, just the DAR.
Okay, all right. Well, that's all right. I had an article in there about the Sons of Liberty, and probably what I need to do is send you a copy so you'll have it in the library. And so Paul Revere also knew Dr. Warren. Dr. I want to say Richard Warren, but it isn't Richard. Anyway, Dr. Warren. And on that evening, he met a friend. Well, that friend happened to be John Pulling. And John Pulling went to the church, the Old North Church, where with a friend who was also a member by the name of Bernard, John Bernard, went together to the church. John Bernard was the lookout, and the only way that John Pulling was able to get into the church through the verger, Newman. Okay, Newman was a young man who ran not a bed, well, we would call it bed and breakfast. It was called a tavern back then for British officers. So he was suspected of not being a loyal patriot. And his descendants, however, think he carried the lanterns. And my ancestors think that John Pulling carried the lantern. Paul Revere was also a friend of Richard Devens. If you've ever heard of Fort Devens, Massachusetts, that's the same family. And when he crossed over to Charlestown, the person who went to Larkin's barn and saddled up the horse and gave it to Paul Revere was my 5th great-grandfather. So there's a lot of fascinating, I mean, all of these ancestors of yours, they don't have to be prominent or rich or whatever. They were in an important part of history. Their name is on a document somewhere that they did something. They contributed, they fought, whatever it might be. So I hope you, and by the way, I want to be sure to say this, Suzanne, there's no such thing as a former genealogist.
No.
So if you're bitten by the bug, you're bitten forever.
I think that's true of everybody in this room and everybody who's logged on too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm open for questions.
Okay, let me see. I think there's something in the chat here. Hold on, let me look at the chat. Let's see here. Oh, hold on. That's just something that's directed towards me. Hold on. I just wanted to let the class know that I will be putting everything into the chat box like we talked about at the beginning of class. I was just waiting until after Marston was done because I'm sharing my screen with you. And if I did that, it would show in on the recording. So that's why I didn't do it right now. But I have not forgotten. I'll do that when he is done. Any questions from the people who are logged in? There's a lot of information we've gone over. Now, Marston, I think, I know the Master Genealogist is a program very similar to like Roots Magic.
That's correct. That's a substitute.
Family tree.
Right.
But however, you were mentioning the other day that you didn't think they're still making it. Is that correct?
Oh, no, just this one.
Just that version. Okay.
Yeah, no, just the Master Gene. No, the others are different developments, but they're very viable. The important thing is to understand is that this powerful document will produce that book that you saw right here. This book all comes from the Master Genealogist, and the index in the back of this book, for example, that you would have thousands of names, right? I think you would agree.
Yes, absolutely.
You know how long it took to do this one? What do you think?
You scanned all these pages yourself?
20 seconds to produce the index.
20 seconds, that's amazing.
20 seconds to produce that whole entire index for the book. You don't do it until the end, obviously, but that's what, and there are people today who don't use the powerful, who sit down and type, excuse me, every one of those names, every one of those dates, every one of those pages. Now, how long do you think that would take?
I can imagine.
3 months, 3 months, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I know the Southern California Genealogical Society has a SIG just for the Master Genealogist users. So how long have you been using Master Genealogists? Are we talking 5 years?
Since 1992, probably. I think that's
Wow.
what, I'm not even sure what this version is, but I think it is around 1992. He did upgrade it, but he quit about, I don't know, 10, 15, probably 10, 15 years ago. And and others came along. And you mentioned this legacy, I believe, and you mentioned what was the other one? You have the other ones, I guess.
Yeah.
And so please, if you haven't done it yet, just start with your name, all of your siblings, your parents, ask them who their siblings, if you don't know who your aunts and uncles are, who your cousins are, all that goes in, not just your line. It's very, very important to put those other lines because you don't know who else in your family is working on your history. That's what's exciting. The other thing that's exciting is DNA. And I will tell you, I never believed it would happen to me, but it did. The DNA, I have and I'm going to use a term here that you may never have heard of before. It's called double blood cousin. Suzanne, you probably know what that means, but in any case, it's where my mother's brother married my father's sister. So 3 of the births of that marriage are my double blood cousins. And one of them is just a few months younger than I, and we've been close since babyhood. Okay, so we've known each other all our lives. When the DNA came out, and his daughter persuaded my cousin to do it, I have done a couple of them, 3 maybe, and a name appeared. I never saw. I mean, quite frankly, being an Episcopalian Christian, whatever, I saw the name Klein, and I said, okay, who's that? I've never, nobody ever in my family ever had that name. And so he contacted me and gave me some information that was important. He didn't know who his father and mother were. He was adopted at 3 days old from a family from San Diego who went all the way to Virginia to claim him and put his name put their name on his birth certificate. We had no clue about it, who his father was or mother. And I said, well, and I scratched my head because I knew he was of Lebanese background. He knew that his father, he had heard that his father was in the Navy during the Korean War. And so I scratched my head knowing, well, it's not not mine. I was in high school when he was born in 53. And I only had 2 cousins out of 30 who were born before I was. Gone. And both of them at this point are gone. The one that came to mind were brothers. They both were brothers, by the way. And one that came to mind was one that I didn't know as much about, but I knew that he had military service, whereas his other brother did not. So I contacted the sister, who was still alive, of these 2 brothers. And she said, oh, yeah. I told her who the name was. And she said, oh, yes. He also has a half brother. So I identified the father. We had a wonderful reunion together. We talked about his father, who unfortunately was an alcoholic, a ne'er-do-well, and probably if he had lived with him, this cousin of mine would never have gone through college, law school, and become a successful attorney. He looks every bit the Lebanese background. And so as a result, I'm sorry about that. Somebody's home, so my cousin's home. So that's how I discovered a brand new cousin. So DNA is going to be very important to your research, I can assure you. And if you do that, you may find cousins who are already working on your genealogy. And I'm lucky because I've identified somebody, 1 or 2 others, who on my mother's side, who are doing the genealogy, and we work together. So don't feel that nowadays you are so much more fortunate than some of us who would go back 25 years or more, had to do it the hard way.
Yes, we talk a lot about DNA in this class. We have some excellent books. I'm going to put in a plug for our new research room. We have several really good books on DNA and using DNA for your ancestry. And we'll be talking more about that after you wrap up your presentation. But we're kind of getting towards the point in time where we need.
That's fine with me. Yes. Listen, I love this subject, and I'm hoping I can excite some people. Suzanne, they can contact me if they have any other questions.
Yeah, there is a couple in the chat box. Let me read them to you. Let's see here. Joe, let's see here. Bonnie says that, let's see.
Oh, I see there are 9 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, Bonnie says that she shares mtDNA with Princess Diana. Is her link to royalty go through her maternal lines? And by the way, Mr. Watson, you and I are cousins because of Howland and Tilly.
I know. What's the name? Do you want to give me the name of the person?
Bonnie, do you mind if you can just type into the box if it's okay if I give the last name? Or you can email it.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Marston,
Give them my email. Absolutely, give them my email.
Okay, yeah, yes. Okay, Bonnie says that she can give her last name. It's Bonnie Rardin, spelled R-A-I-D-I-N.
Okay, now obviously they, with all the generations between there and now, we'd have to find a mutual connection somewhere along the line. That'd be kind of fun.
And then Jolene also says that I am also a cousin to Mr. Watson. I'm a direct lineage to Elizabeth and John Howland through their daughter Desire.
That's mine.
Yes, she says, yeah, Jolene, who's logged in today through Zoom.
Yeah, I see it.
She's
And
also
I'm
your cousin.
Yeah, Desire Howland married Gorman, John Gorman. Gorham, sorry, Gorham, G-O-R-H-A-M. So yes, I come from the same one, Jolene. So happy cousin.
And then Betty wanted to clarify, can you still purchase Master Genealogist to your knowledge, or do you have to use alternatives?
No, you use one of the newer ones. Just make sure that it can produce the kind of book. You see this book. Look at my 4 books and look at the whole formatting. Everything is done right out of the, you just punch a button and you have to do some work, editing work, and I don't want to get into that. I'm sure, Suzanne, you understand that too. There's a lot of editing that has to be done after it's produced. It doesn't come out nice and neatly as you're looking at today. So, but it produces a book. And the interesting part of producing this book is that all through my research, all through the typing in of information and so forth, I produced the books many to so that I could look at my work and see where I needed to fill in some blanks. And it can be done in less than 5 minutes, the book, maybe 10 minutes, depends how big it is. So it's a tool that you just don't want to miss. Trying to do it, I still talk to people who said, oh, I'm doing it on Word. Oh my gosh, or oh my word, actually. That is tedious, that is long, and quite frankly, you could miss some important steps. You really could.
My gosh, Marston, you wouldn't believe how many cousins you have in this class logged in today by Zoom. April's also your cousin through Howland and Tilly. And John and Sherry says that her husband, John, is also your cousin through Howland and Tilly. You have a bunch of cousins here.
Well, the truth of the matter is he had a very prolific family. But the one who had Desire, Jolene, that every time you can move down a couple of notches on the same line, that makes us even closer cousins. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. This is fascinating how many people are in class who have the same line as you. That's so fast. So I can say then that some of these might find that gateway ancestor through that website you were sharing with us through WikiTree.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it was called, and you can use the, let me show it to you again. It was called, oh, come on, Marston. Why am I not getting, oh no, that's the wrong one. This is the one I was talking about. I noticed there were others as well. You put in is that who are the gateway ancestors to royalty? Okay, and This was one that came up. I don't know if I can go back. I may be able to go backwards on this one. Let me see if I can do that. So it will list, and in this case, I don't know what the additional gateway to be confirmed. Okay, so that's interesting. All right. Let's see if there was another one. Okay. Am I related to royalty? You can see all of these things. And New England Gateway ancestors to proven royal descent. That was another one that was online. So just go through that, and there's your list. Again, wonderful list. Okay, so there's my Jemima, and it'll tell you something about her and where she came from. Again, that's, it needs verification, as to what dates, the actual dates. And the other books that you have there, Suzanne, from noted royal authors are Doug Richardson and of course, David Farris, and as well as Gary Boyd Roberts. So Gary doesn't send, he does not use, he does not verify the birthday, marriage, and death, or anything like that. He gives you the names, so you still have more research to do. You can't just take his book and say, "Oh, well, Gary says this is, who it is." He's right, maybe, but that's not what the lineage societies are going to allow you to do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But that's one of the things that we really stress in this class is learning how to find reliable proof.
That's correct. But I just love the fact that you can do, as I say, even if you're using some of these other sites, like the one I just showed you, this one here, if you can only just put in names and some approximate dates and places and so forth, just don't put in, this one. And you can tell after a while, you'll say, okay, this one from Cambridge looks real. And it was. But the Atlantis, Ocean, New Jersey, I have no idea.
Marston, scroll up just a little bit. Let's see your father, Thomas. See, the first one does not give father.
That's correct. Whereas this one does. And so then, let me move out of the way. So this is Thomas Waldegrave, you see? Anthony Waldegrave. So some of these are very good. This one is, I happen to know this is accurate. This one's 1640, okay? And his father was Anthony and so forth. So yes, sometimes the births, and that's very typical of, 13th, 14th century on back, you may not always have the exact birth date, but they often would have the death date because they, they've been buried somewhere and they happen to have it. And then you go to some of the wives so that you can find out that you have the Elizabeth Howard, and the Howards are the ones who married, who were married, one of the Howards. There are 6 wives, as you well know, of Henry VIII. One of them was a Howard. So.
Okay, Marston, we have another question in the chat box. Can one use charlemagne.org website to find gateway ancestors?
Well, no, I don't know about that one. I can't answer that question. Now, the ones I showed you are all, you may not be all you need, but it certainly would be. Yes, Charlemagne Society may have a list of gateways, but that also doesn't mean that that's all of the royalty. Not everybody's descended from Charlemagne necessarily. They also have William the Conqueror. You also have Otto the Great. You have different countries that may not necessarily connect to Charlemagne. Does that make some sense too? So you can't just use that one sort. But it's always a good idea to, if you want to find out something about a society, like the Jamestown Society. That's how I found out that I had a New England ancestor who never set foot in Virginia, but he was one of the shareholders. And I'm now a member of Jamestown. And my wife, Kathy, if you're a Hopkins, you have both Mayflower and Jamestown. Go ahead, sorry.
Wonderful. Now, one of the questions in the chat box is, do you get American Genealogist magazine, and what is your thoughts on it?
Oh, I think it's wonderful. Yes, of course, I belong. And again, the membership, if you're serious, and if you're doing it on, I mean, if you're only doing it on one Sunday a year or one Sunday a month, maybe you don't want to pay those fees, but it's not very expensive. 100, I forgot. I mean, I'm not, you can look online. You could be doing genealogy. Look, some of you maybe, if you're early bird like me, I get up at between 4 and 5. I generally spend 3 hours on my book, the one I'm working on now, before breakfast. So whatever's convenient for you. If you're not, even if you work, if you're really an early bird and you go to bed early or whatever but you can get up early and do 2 or 3 hours, that's it. That's serious genealogy. Then I would say do join the New England Historic Genealogical Society. Absolutely. Because that has a lot of original digitized documents that are totally acceptable to lineage societies. And it's not easy. I don't know about the DI ladies you have in the room, but I'm sure they had to be very careful about their applications.
Okay, so I'm going to give the class one last question and one last opportunity to ask any questions, whether you are logged in through Zoom or whether you're here in person today. Any questions?
We did it 1.5 hours, didn't we? I didn't even notice that. Oh my gosh.
So Marston, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite the class before I stop the recording. I'm going to invite the class to stay for the second half of class, which we'll have for a little bit. We'll have about 45 minutes left of class. And then we're going to take a half-hour break. And then we're going to come back through Zoom. And here it is also in person and have our open house ceremony, our grand opening ceremony. And with that, I will say thank you very, very much for your presentation. It was wonderful. And we'd love to have you back again at a future date if it's convenient for you.
In person, I'll come.
In person, I would like
Yes,
that.
my granddaughter works at Renown Hospital. So I think you all know where that is, I'm sure.
Yes, we are familiar with Renown.
And I thank you. It's 4:11 back here, so it's getting toward social hour. That's all I'm going to say.
Samuel Adams.
Yeah, there you go. All right, thank you.
All right, thank
very,
you.
very much.
We really appreciate it. And I will stop the recording at this point in time.
All right, thank you.